There are moments in life that no camera can fully capture, no microphone can truly preserve, and no words can entirely explain. Moments that exist somewhere between the living and the letting go. What happened in a quiet hospital room in Georgia in the spring of 2019 was exactly that kind of moment. It involved two of the greatest voices country music ever produced, a friendship that had lasted nearly 4 decades, and a song that was never meant to be heard by the world. But before we get to that room, before we get to that song, you need to understand what Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton meant to each other. Because without that foundation, the weight of what happened simply cannot land the way it deserves to. Kenny Rogers had lived a life that could fill 10 novels. Born in a government housing project in Houston, Texas, on August 21, 1938, he grew up in a family of 8 children where some nights' dinner was nothing more than peanut butter smeared on plain bread. He saved $60 by scrubbing floors and carrying plates at a hotel just to buy a guitar from a Sears catalog. That guitar became his entire world. By the time he was 17, he had become the first person in his family to graduate high school, and by 19, he had a record climbing the local charts in Texas. He had drive in a way that most people never develop, the kind of drive that comes not from ambition alone but from having truly known what it feels like to have nothing at all. His road to stardom was not a straight line. It curved through jazz clubs and folk groups, through a psychedelic rock band called The First Edition, through a television variety show that somehow outdrew the Partridge Family in certain cities. He married 5 times, missed the childhood of his first daughter because the road demanded everything he had, and carried that guilt openly and honestly for the rest of his life. By the late 1970s, though, something clicked into place. A 3-minute song called The Gambler, released in November 1978, transformed Kenny Rogers from a respected musician into an American institution. The song won him a Grammy. It spawned a television franchise. It gave him a persona so powerful that decades later, people still quoted its lines as genuine life philosophy. But fame, as Kenny well knew, had a way of giving with one hand and taking with the other. The arenas filled up, the records sold in the millions, and the personal cost kept arriving quietly in the background. What kept him grounded through all of it, perhaps more than anything else, was a friendship that began in the early 1980s with a small woman from the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee who happened to have the biggest voice and the biggest heart in the entire music industry. Dolly Parton entered Kenny Rogers' professional life like a force of nature wearing rhinestones. When the two of them stepped into a studio together in August of 1983 to record a song written by the Bee Gees called Islands in the Stream, neither of them had any idea what was about to happen. The song shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, knocked Total Eclipse of the Heart off the top spot, and simultaneously topped both the country and adult contemporary charts. It was the first time a country duo had held all 3 positions since Glen Campbell years earlier. In its first week alone, the song received over 4,000 radio spins. By Christmas of that year, it had sold 2 million copies. Eventually, the Recording Industry Association of America would certify it triple platinum, representing over 3 million units sold in the United States alone. But statistics, however impressive, missed the point entirely. What mattered about Kenny and Dolly was not the numbers. What mattered was the chemistry, the warmth, the sense you got every single time they appeared together that these were two people who genuinely delighted in each other's company. Dolly once said publicly that Kenny was the only man she had ever seen who made white hair look sexy. Kenny, for his part, described their relationship in terms that made it clear this was something far deeper than a professional arrangement. He called her one of the most real people he had ever known. Venue managers on their joint tours reportedly placed bets on which city's audience would finally witness the two of them share a kiss. It never happened, and somehow that restraint made everything more meaningful, not less. Over the course of 30 years, they officially recorded only 5 duets together. Just 5 songs across 3 decades. Islands in the Stream came first in 1983. Then came Love is Strange, followed by Real Love, then Christmas Without You, and finally, in 2013, a song called You Can't Make Old Friends. That last one deserves its own paragraph, because in many ways it set the emotional stage for everything that would follow. On July 2nd, 2013, Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton reunited in a Nashville studio to record You Can't Make Old Friends. Kenny was 7 to 4 years old. Dolly was 6 to 7. When they reached the line in the song that asked, "What will I do when you are gone?" the studio went completely silent. The sound engineer present that day later recalled that people were wiping tears from their eyes before the first verse had even finished. Kenny himself had to stop recording more than once to collect himself. The song only reached number 57 on the charts, but that was entirely beside the point. Its music video accumulated 1 million views in just 10 days, a remarkable achievement for two artists whose average fan was already well into their 50s. The song was not a chart chaser. It was a truth teller, and the truth it told was simply this: some friendships are irreplaceable, and everyone in that studio that day understood they were witnessing something they might never see again. They were right, though not in the way anyone expected. By the time 2018 arrived, Kenny Rogers was showing the physical costs of a life spent almost entirely on the road. He had performed over the course of his career at a pace that would have broken most people half his age. His final tour, called The Gambler's Last Deal, had taken him to 5 continents and through 200 shows. But at 7 to 9 years old, his body had begun delivering ultimatums his stubbornness could no longer override. In April of 2018, he canceled the last 8 shows of that farewell tour after suffering a dizzy spell on stage. Concerts in North Carolina and London were called off overnight. The Stagecoach Festival had to remove his name from their promotional materials. For the first time in 60 years of performing, Kenny Rogers did not finish what he had started. He had kept a leather notebook since 1957 tracking every single concert he had ever played. The final count on his farewell tour was 53 performances. He did not get to add any more pages. He also did not get to do something he had hoped for deeply. He did not get to share one final stage performance with Dolly Parton. That unfulfilled wish would haunt the edges of the story that followed. Then came May of 2019. Kenny Rogers was rushed to a hospital in Sandy Springs, Georgia. His team described the situation publicly as severe dehydration, and his spokesperson was firm in pushing back against what she called wild misinformation spreading through the media. Kenny himself recorded a brief video from his hospital bed, smiling as he always smiled, telling fans he was not folding his cards quite yet. But people who knew him well understood that this was more serious than any press release was willing to admit. Arthritis had been quietly dismantling his knees for years. A back surgery from an earlier chapter of his life continued to create problems. His cholesterol had been a source of concern for decades. In 2014, he had undergone surgery for a dangerous intestinal condition, and now doctors feared that condition might be returning. He was placed under close medical observation and would remain in that hospital for 2 weeks. It was during those 2 weeks that something happened which very few people know about, and which even fewer were present to witness. Dolly Parton came to see him. She did not come with a publicist or camera crew. She did not come to generate a headline or to be photographed for a magazine cover. She came because Kenny Rogers was her closest friend in the music industry, and he was lying in a hospital bed, and she was Dolly Parton, which meant she was constitutionally incapable of staying away when someone she loved needed her there. She brought with her, according to people close to both of them, a quiet determination that the two of them were not finished yet. Not professionally, not personally, and not musically. What unfolded in that hospital room over the course of her visit was, by all accounts, deeply intimate and deeply emotional. They talked for a long time. They laughed, because the two of them were always laughing around each other, even in difficult circumstances. And then, at some point, in the way that musicians sometimes communicate most honestly not through words but through music, they sang together. It was not a grand recording session. There was no elaborate production, no team of sound engineers adjusting microphones and monitoring levels. It was two old friends, one of them in a hospital bed, the other sitting close enough to hold his hand if the moment called for it, sharing a song in the way that people sometimes share prayer. Those who were present described the atmosphere in terms that most journalists would find difficult to write without feeling they were overstating the emotion. But there was no overstating it. Kenny's voice, always rich and warm and distinctly his own, carried in that hospital room a quality it had never quite carried on any studio recording or any concert stage. It carried the sound of a man who understood, fully and without self-pity, that he was in the final chapter of his life and that the friend sitting beside him was one of the greatest gifts that chapter had ever given him. Dolly, for her part, sang with a kind of tenderness that people only find when the audience is one person they love completely rather than thousands of strangers they are performing for. The song they chose was not something they had ever recorded together officially. It was something quieter, something more personal, a melody that existed only in that room and in the memories of the people fortunate enough to be standing nearby. People in the hallway outside reportedly went still. Hospital staff who passed the doorway slowed their steps without quite knowing why, simply feeling that something was happening on the other side of that door that deserved a moment of quiet respect. One account describes a nurse standing in the corridor with her eyes closed, listening, and not making any move to continue down the hall until the singing had stopped. When it was over, neither Kenny nor Dolly apparently said very much. Some moments do not require words as a follow-up. They simply exist, complete in themselves, needing nothing added and nothing explained. What makes this story carry the weight that it does is not simply the sadness of a great artist in declining health. Plenty of artists have reached the end of their careers and their lives, and while those endings are always poignant, they do not all resonate in the same way. What makes this particular moment resonate so deeply is the friendship at the center of it. Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton spent nearly 40 years being each other's most consistent source of professional joy and personal steadiness. In an industry that chews through relationships at a remarkable pace, in a genre that can be as cutthroat as any other when the money and the spotlight are large enough, the two of them maintained something uncomplicated and genuine. They made each other laugh. They made each other better. They showed up for each other. And when Kenny Rogers was lying in a hospital bed in Georgia, she showed up again. Less than a year after that hospital visit, on March 20th, 2020, Kenny Rogers passed away at his home in Sandy Springs, Georgia. It was 10:25 in the evening. He was 81 years old. Wanda, his wife of 23 years, was at his side. So were his twin sons Justin and Jordan, who were 15 at the time. His 3 older children were present as well. One nurse later shared that his final words, spoken during a FaceTime call with his grandson Kyle, were characteristically simple and characteristically him. He said, "Be kind and stick together." Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there could be no large public memorial service. But the tributes came anyway. The Grand Ole Opry went dark. The Astrodome in Houston, the city where a poor kid from a government housing project had first dreamed of something more, turned off its lights. Las Vegas displayed the lyrics of his song Lady across its